The underground parking garage beneath the glass towers of downtown Chicago never truly slept. Even close to midnight, the low hum of engines, the echo of footsteps, and the buzz of fluorescent lights filled the space. Mark Rivera pushed his janitorial cart slowly between the rows of expensive cars, the wheels squeaking softly with every turn. He worked the night shift 6 days a week, cleaning offices and garages while the city rested. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was honest work, and it kept a roof over his head and food on the table for his daughter. Mark was a single father. Ever since his wife passed away 3 years earlier, everything he did revolved around Lily. At 8 years old, she was quiet, observant, and far more mature than most kids her age. On nights when Mark couldn't afford a babysitter, Lily came with him. She sat patiently in their old sedan parked in a well-lit corner of the garage, coloring or reading while waiting for his shift to end. Mark checked on her every few minutes, glancing toward the car as if his eyes were tied to it by an invisible string. That night, his shift had been long and exhausting. His back ached as he leaned on the mop, spreading water across the concrete floor. As he worked, a sharp smell reached his nose, faint, but unmistakable. Mark paused, sniffing the air. Years of fixing old cars and surviving on tight budgets had taught him to recognize certain things quickly. Gasoline was one of them. He followed the scent, his heart beginning to beat faster. A sleek black luxury car sat a few meters away, spotless and expensive, clearly belonging to someone important. Mark crouched slightly, noticing a dark, wet trail forming beneath the vehicle. His stomach tightened. Before he could move closer, the sound of confident footsteps echoed through the garage. A tall man in a tailored suit stepped out of the elevator, checking his phone as he walked. Mark recognized him instantly from the building's lobby screens and business magazines left behind in offices. Thomas Blake, the CEO. A powerful man who owned half the skyline Mark cleaned every night. He walked toward the black car without a second thought, his hand reaching into his pocket for the keys. At the same time, Mark's eyes darted to his own sedan. Lily was watching everything through the windshield, her small face pressed close to the glass. Fear shot through Mark's chest, not just for the man approaching the car, but for his daughter sitting only a short distance away. His mind raced. Should he call security? Run? There wasn't time. The CEO was already there, standing right beside the driver's door. Mark didn't think about his job. He didn't think about embarrassment or consequences. Acting purely on instinct, he straightened up and shouted across the garage, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Don't get in the car." The words rang out, sharp and urgent, freezing the moment in place. The CEO stopped. The garage went silent. Every eye turned toward the janitor gripping a mop, his chest rising and falling rapidly, eyes wide with alarm. Mark knew how it looked, but he also knew something was terribly wrong. For a few long seconds after the shout, no one moved. The sound of Mark's warning still echoed faintly in the vast parking garage. Thomas Blake stood frozen beside his car, his hand hovering just above the door handle. Slowly, he turned around, his expression hard and confused. His first instinct was anger. Years of authority had conditioned him to expect respect, not sudden commands from strangers, especially not from a janitor. "What did you just say?" Thomas asked sharply, his voice calm but cold. Mark swallowed, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his ears. He tightened his grip on the mop, then released it, forcing himself to step forward. "Sir, please don't get in that car," he said again, this time lower but steadier. "Something's wrong with it." Before Thomas could respond, a small, terrified scream cut through the tension. "Dad!" Both men turned toward the sound. Mark's daughter Lily was standing up inside the old sedan, her finger pressed against the windshield as she pointed frantically toward the black car. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Mark rushed toward her instinctively, but stopped when he saw what she was pointing at. The liquid beneath the CEO's car had spread, forming a thin, shiny line across the concrete. Under the harsh white lights, it glistened unnaturally. The smell of gasoline was stronger now, impossible to ignore. Thomas took an unconscious step back. Mark moved quickly, positioning himself between Lily's car and the leaking vehicle. "I was cleaning over there," he explained, his voice urgent. I smelled gas. That much fuel. It's not normal. One spark, one press of the ignition, it could blow. The word blow seemed to snap Thomas fully into the moment. He looked down again, really looked this time, and the color drained from his face. Years of boardrooms and risk assessments suddenly meant nothing compared to the very real danger in front of him. Security guards rushed into the garage, alerted by the raised voices and Lily's scream. Mark pointed immediately at the car. "Nobody touch it," he warned. "Get everyone back." To Thomas's credit, he didn't argue. He stepped away without protest, his phone forgotten in his hand. The guards quickly secured the area, ushering people toward the elevators and blocking off the row of vehicles. Within minutes, building security contacted the authorities. As they waited, Mark knelt beside Lily's door, speaking softly to calm her down. "You did good," he told her, forcing a small smile. "You saw it before anyone else." Thomas watched the scene in silence. The janitor who had yelled at him moments earlier was now just a father, gently reassuring his child. There was no fear in Mark's eyes anymore, only concern for his daughter's safety. When officials finally arrived, their inspection confirmed Mark's instinct. The fuel line had been deliberately damaged. Starting the car could have caused a fire or an explosion. Thomas exhaled slowly, the weight of what almost happened settling in. He turned to Mark, his voice quieter, stripped of its usual authority. "You saved my life," he said simply. Mark shook his head. "I just did what anyone should do," he replied. But both men knew the truth. Most people would have stayed silent. That night, in a forgotten parking garage, the distance between a CEO and a janitor disappeared, replaced by something far more powerful: respect. The parking garage slowly returned to its usual rhythm after the authorities cleared the scene. Yellow caution tape remained wrapped around the damaged car, and the sharp smell of gasoline lingered in the air. Mark held Lily's hand as they stood off to the side, waiting to be told they could leave. His legs still felt weak, and only now did he realize how close everything had come to disaster. Thomas Blake hadn't left. Instead of rushing back to his penthouse or calling for another ride, he stood nearby, deep in thought, watching Mark and his daughter. For the first time in years, his perfectly planned schedule no longer mattered. What mattered was the image burned into his mind. A man with nothing but courage and instinct stepping forward when everyone else would have stayed quiet. When the final officer nodded and signaled that it was safe to move, Thomas walked toward Mark. His posture was different now, less commanding, more human. "I owe you more than a thank you," Thomas said. "If you hadn't spoken up, I wouldn't be standing here." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't think about anything else," he admitted. "I just saw the danger, and my daughter was right there." Lily looked up at the tall man, gripping her father's hand. Thomas smiled gently at her. "You were very brave," he said. "Both of you." The next morning, Mark returned to work expecting life to continue exactly as before. He pushed his cart through the lobby, nodding politely at people who rarely noticed him. Around noon, his supervisor called him into the office, her expression unreadable. Mark's heart sank, fear tightening his chest. He wondered if shouting at a CEO had finally cost him his job. Instead, Thomas was waiting inside. "I asked for you," Thomas said, standing to shake Mark's hand. "Please, sit." Thomas spoke plainly, without rehearsed speeches or corporate language. He explained how the incident had forced him to reflect on the people who kept his buildings running, people he passed every day without truly seeing. Mark listened quietly, unsure where the conversation was headed. Then Thomas made an offer. He arranged a scholarship fund for Lily's education, covering her future schooling. He also offered Mark a new position in building operations, day hours, better pay, and benefits that would finally give Mark stability. Mark's eyes filled with tears he hadn't expected. "I didn't help you for this," he said, his voice shaking. "I know," Thomas replied. "That's why you deserve it." Weeks later, life looked different. Mark ate dinner with Lily every night instead of leaving for work after sunset. Lily's laughter filled their small apartment, lighter and freer than before. And every morning, as Mark walked through the same building he once cleaned in silence, people greeted him by name. But the biggest change wasn't the job or the money. It was the lesson Thomas carried forward, and shared throughout his company. that greatness isn't defined by titles or wealth, but by the courage to act when it matters most. All because one single dad janitor chose to shout, "Don't get in the car."